you very much. Thank you, Chris and Randolph, for having me, for curating this. I'm going to read a short story called 575. It's got an epigraph. It is in 3 parts. You'll be able to tell when a part is over because I'll take a long draft of my life-affirming, life-sustaining, and occasionally life-debilitating beverage here. The epigraph is a haiku by Busan. Tilling the field, the man who has asked the way has disappeared. 575, part 1. 5 on the west hill, 7 behind the sagebrush, 5 more at the north. Idaho Spurman pointed out the pockets of bandits. He was the sheriff of a town that didn't count. The tips of his thick saloon door red mustache pointed at his knees. 2 deputies stood behind him, bare in the face, light in the revolver. The marshal said they were running the coach through Victory's Child because nobody cared about the town anymore. There was a thin finger bone laid out on some Eastern industrialist map, with a bulge at one end, hinting at knuckle engorged by the constant breaking and healing of sideshow fistfights. Victory's Child was just waiting for the dregs of the vein of the mountain to dry before vanishing right away. Every day, the few miners who still bothered lost more weight and sweat and pain than they brought back in gold. No Pony Express post, no train stop, no point. So when $10,000 in gold needed to be shipped to bank headquarters in Philadelphia, the marshal decided to use a little misdirection. Then Victory's Child found itself as many willing deputies as it could and right quick, Bradley and Wyatt. They stood behind Idaho, nervous hands near their guns, with palms as moist as a 14-year-old drifter brought to his first whorehouse by a generous gunslinger. Idaho said, Marshall mentioned them. A down-and-out bunch of thugs. Mean, like a sick dog. The stagecoach would be there in the morning and pass along the road the bandits had staked out sometime in the afternoon. As far as the world knew, the coach was just hauling some brain-baked-in-the-desert manager from Two Rivers back east, where you could sit behind a tiny desk and trade in tiny finances, while the desert heat slowly leaked out of his hair and ears, and his brain cooled to that East Coast branker frigidity that kept the boot sole of high finance firmly on the spine of humanity. That kind of stagecoach wouldn't have any protection with it. And you know, an accountant back east would have crunched some numbers and figures. It wouldn't have been so bad, financially speaking, if that banker got scalped in transit. Some other coach would have all the marshals riding next to it. A faint, the marshal had said. Fucking faint. Idaho said, keep your guns loaded. You never know what they'll do. And rest all you can. Idaho turned back to the town. The deputies stuttered along behind him. They were ranchers on their way back to their ranches and only fired guns to scare wolves away. Bradley muttered about a wife on the other side of the Rockies, a woman curved like the mountains themselves and white as the purest cream. Wyatt just shook his head, moving his chin shadow back and forth over the hastily pinned badge. That $50 looked a lot smaller now. 2 grotesque cacti built the eastern entrance to Victory's Child by not dying in the desert. One of them seemed to hold a great sharp cliff on its flecked bicep. A vulture sat on that cliff always, waving in the heat like bunting on a caboose's handrail. There are 3 things to do if you're on your back in Victory's Child at night: rise, freeze, or dehydrate. The sun dropped all of its heat slowly out of the sky, creeping like a near-dead drunk wino to the comfort of the gutter below the horizon. Even those walking down the street tried to act like they'd already abandoned the place. Some were translucent, like a wet white dress stretched out to dry. Mothers hugged babies close. Fathers stared stoically at doors. Smoke slithered from the bandits' fires, eradicating any hopes that their bandanas were made of mere rumor, and their guns fired bullets of misplaced fear. Part 2. The stagecoach is late. I almost hope it's been hit. We can't protect it. Idaho squinted at the west entrance to Victory's Child. Bradley and Wyatt tried to squint with him, giving long looks into the flat yellow of the preceding desert. The sharp surrounding cliffs seemed to lean in to get a better view of the coming bloodshed, while all human faces molded to stone. Idaho turned away from the west view, and like the turned away from tea kettle, the stagecoach boiled out of the dust. Bradley and Wyatt grunted at Idaho, who just kept walking towards the eastern edge of town. The fuel-injected fog ransacked the town, revealing the stagecoach when it settled, and a fat, red-faced, barrel-built bank official when the stagecoach door opened. The driver seemed built of molted lizard skin and tumbleweed skeleton, with a mustache seething from his face. The bank hadn't even sprung for a Mandarite shotgun. Idaho said, "Well, boys, it's on now. 17 bandits nearby. Better pray to God." The barrel banker blubbered his name in Idaho, sweat and saliva shooting like a geyser from his face. Apologies and accusations wound round each other like maypole ribbons, were slightly audible with the curses and frustrations uncoiling from his meaty mouth. It was all, "We don't know who leaked the fucking information," and "You sure as fucking hell should have been more prepared anyway," and "Fucking Christ on a 100-legged homosexual horse, why didn't you have a goddamn cactus fucking battalion of deputies in this narrow ass crack of existence?" And, "Well, I've heard you're a capable man." And, "Geez, I could use about 100 fingers of whiskey and a 100-fingered whore if I could find such a thing, one that wouldn't use 25 of them to rob me blind. Why, this one time, I was in San Francisco, right by the Pacific Ocean, and by God, dancing on a spinning bullet with the giantness of the ocean make you feel really small, like some small dot on the great tapestry of creation. But I was in San Francisco, where this whorehouse a buddy of mine told me about, and it looked like a boarding house for survivors from some horrible mill accident, the kind that leaves the New England River red and gray with blood and ash. And I was drunk when the Lord Jesus Christ himself wiggled his hands by accident and let loose a little miracle on the only canteen I had left, and decided, yeah, the girl with no arms had a pretty enough face, and a nice set of jiggling titties, and was a bargain to boot, and she was worth 10 times what I paid her for what she could do with her mouth. And you better believe a God-fearing man like myself tipped her a little extra, half what she was worth compared to this fully armed whore from Boston, some waste-of-life British bitch who seemed to think that men just wanted to get out for a few minutes inside a dead body in a bed. And halfway through I shouted it would have been free to grease up a knothole in the nearest tree. But I do for a glass of water, a bite to eat, and a place in your saloon, put my feet up while my backside recovers from the ride. Idaho obliged as much as possible. The bank needed its gold, so after the barrel had his sit, he rolled back into the stagecoach and the driver flapped the reins like there wasn't even mail inside, and let the horses just kind of walk towards the other end of town, as if maybe they kind of needed to get to the next town by next week, maybe. Idaho and his deputies followed as if they planned on taking a little walk anyway. Idaho said, "They'll shoot the driver, then rush towards the stagecoach. Shoot, then take cover." The 7 bandits in the sagebrush jumped out first, killing the driver 7 times over, with bullets that exploded his eyeballs and shattered his ribs, and one that burst his bladder so a stream of urine shot out of his stomach along with blood and bits of intestines. Hope you all ordered food later. One of them grabbed the reins of the slow-moving horses. The 5 to the west and the 5 to the north stayed put behind their cover, keeping their guns pointed at the coach. Idaho cleansed the sides of the coach of the bandits with a hose flow of bullets before diving behind a rock to stay alive and reload. Bradley and Wyatt were bleeding before they knew to be scared, each looking down at sudden red sprays around their legs and catching their small intestines that were suddenly leaping out huge gunshot wounds, until the rest of the bullets ripped through their abdomens, leaving them flopping in the dust like detached lizard tails. The rock around Idaho began to smoke. Bradley and Wyatt were bouncing from the bullet barrage, absorbing bullets that should have been aimed at Idaho. Their blood sprays really rocking when their femoral arteries were burst concurrently, shooting choreographed blood arcs. Idaho pulled out the rifle he'd stashed behind the rock last night and put a bullet through a peeked-out head of one of the bandits on the West Hill, through his Broca's speech center and motor cortex, before blowing the back of his skull into the dry desert air. The barrel banker plopped out a trap door in the back of the stagecoach and trundled back toward the town, the fat in his fat thighs rippling like pebble rings in a pond, his jowls fluttering like wanted posters in a dust devil, his engorged glutton's stomach bouncing like an inflated boar's bladder up and down with each obese running step. All 9 remaining bandits peered out of their covers to fill his empty life with lead, and he seemed to absorb hundreds of bullets in his fat body, his stomach eating the lead like bonbons, his kidneys exploding in his back, the poisons cleansed from the body and collected in the liver released by its eruption. And finally, a shot through the center of his spine, cutting off half his pain and toppling him to the ground in a colandered pattern of blood spraying out of him. Idaho killed 2 peekers from the north before the others directed their fire back at his rock and drove him into hiding. He pulled a thin bottle of thick whiskey out of his boot, soaked one end of his bandana in it, and dipped the other end in. During his pause, the 3 of the north sneaked down by the stagecoach carrying a large box. Idaho lit the wick and tossed a cocktail at the hill to the west. The cocktail set 2 of the bandits on fire. Another broke his leg at the knee, jumping out of the way, the tibia and fibula bursting through his patella from the impact, 2 jagged white spear tips pointing at the vultures circling above. He passed out, then died of shock. The other dove out of the way, but found his hands covered with gunpowder. A stray spark from one of his partners set him on fire. He ran screaming into the endless American desert. Idaho had lost track of the three to the north. They were in the stagecoach. Two pulled the gold out. The other one kicked out the back window of the coach and pointed a Gatling gun at the rock. It began disintegrating from the machine gun. Bullets started taking microns off Idaho's shoulders. He was pinned and praying. They've got the gold now. Nothing I can do but hope. Fuck their machine gun. With the gold out of the stagecoach and the cover provided by the machine gun, one of the bandits, a tough as horseshoes motherfucker called Ditch, who just wanted to make his daddy proud and turned to gold robbing because his brother always told him his father, a strong as Missouri moonshine motherfucker named Boulder, was wanted by the law for a string of high-profile robberies when he was actually a bespectacled school teacher named Herman who seduced her on his way through town. Ditch crept to the side of Idaho and shot him 12 times. Idaho bled like everybody else. Most of his brains collected in his hat. Part 3. The Vulture Circle. The cliffs rise to their corners. Gold does not buy blood, and blood is what Idaho's dead hand reaches for. Bullet shells like rose petals covering the ground around him, and one cactus flower, cut from a flexed arm by a stray shot, sits by his left ear. The sky explodes out huge and cloudless above the empty stagecoach. The horses fidget and squirm in their harnesses, their horse brains unsure of where all that noise came from and why it stopped so suddenly. A pair of crows finds the sets of deputies' eyes. A coyote creeps to the west hill. Dust rolls like a rattler over the bodies around the stagecoach, bandits willing to kill for the life that gold buys. The triangle corners of their bandanas wave at the soles of each other's boots. A lizard finds shade under the still stagecoach. The wind tumbles a tumbleweed through the scene. From the cliff corner, the vulture waves in the heat, the bounty below almost too great to disturb. Victory's child lets go of its breath for a second and double-checks the locks. Actors become dots. Desert sand grows over them. 5 syllables left. Thank you very much.